podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Poisson, and I am a relationship expert, international speaker, and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV, or on social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that you said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. So here today we have Nic Marks, and we're going to talk about positive emotions and happiness. Hi, Nic.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good today, thank you very much. You?
Yeah, good, thank you. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, so I am a statistician by trade, which sounds quite scary, but I also trained as a therapist when I was young. So I kind of had this mixture between sort of hard statistical skills and soft people skills. Mm-hmm. And over the decades, I've done measurement around people's quality of life, their well-being and their happiness. And it's taken me into the realm of, yes, positive psychology, positive emotions. And right now I really help create happy, highly functional teams and businesses by measuring their experience each week and then feeding that back. But, my experience is broader than that too.
Okay. So in terms of well-being, obviously it sounds obvious that we need positive emotions, but what exactly is it? How would you define that?
So we all are, humans are emotional beings. We have emotions and we have feelings, and they're actually highly functional. So emotions like anger and fear are part of the fight and flight mechanism. They basically motivate us to take evasive action from something that is a threat to us. So if we're angry, we try and deter a violation of some sort. If we're frightened, we're trying to avoid a threat. Yeah. And but the positive emotions, which include happiness, but happiness is a little bit of a vague word, but the positive emotions are really there to help us. What's that?
Which we will go into, sorry.
Yeah. Well, the positive emotions sort of help us create and seize opportunities from a functional perspective. So, and there's an array of them. And so they're all highly functional.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what about, because I quite strongly believe that we also need negative emotions, because sometimes, you have that kind of fake positivity, for want of better words, that actually doesn't help us at all, because sometimes we have to feel the pain, so to speak, to actually get to the bottom of a problem, to then get the positive emotions.
Yeah, in the sense that negative is not that they are negative for us. They are, as I said, functional. They help us. So, let's take an emotion like sadness, quite a difficult emotion, but it's typically about a loss. Mm-hmm. And it could be the loss of a support physical person. Obviously, grief is part of that, but it could be loss of a dream, loss of an opportunity.
Of a business, whatever, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So there's lots of ways that sadness can portray. But what sadness does to us physiologically is it slows us down. Mm-hmm. So, let's say you've just come out of a relationship and you're sad about the end of the relationship. Even if you wanted it to end, you're still sad about the loss of the hope of the relationship. You didn't want it to end. You're actually sad, but you're sad about that loss.
Well, you've invested time and effort in the person, haven't you? So
yeah, absolutely. So you've lost, some of your time, all sorts of things, but it slows us down. Loss. It makes us, when we're feeling sad or grieving, we literally feel drained of energy. And that might sound a weird thing to be functional, but what it does is it makes us reflect. It makes us ponder, think about, go over the events, try. And so in some ways, try not to make the same mistake, or try to recreate the support system you've lost if it's, lost by, accident, death or whatever, or, so it's a functional response to help us reflect, learn our lessons and move on. So, the old therapy idea that, no pain, no gain, there's some truth in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I've just, funny enough, done something, and the quote that I saw was "no rain, no flowers."
Yeah.
And it's exactly that. You did a combination of both, don't you? So in terms of happiness, how would you define happiness then?
So happiness, we use in different ways, the word. So we use it as a feeling. I feel happy. So that's quite immediate. And that is a pure expression of positive emotion. but we also say, I am happy with. And that's effectively a cognitive reflection. It's basically us thinking about what has happened. So we tend to be looking back and saying, I'm happy with this, I'm not happy with this, situation. So we have those two specific ways, but there's also a third way, which is more forward looking. So the one is very present, one is slightly looking towards what's just happened or has happened over time. But there's a forward looking happiness, which is kind of that happiness from feeling we can cope.
Mm-hmm.
That, we sort of have the capacity to go forward. So there's really those three ways you can look at happiness. And in the end, I think it's about feeling good and doing well, to both, the feeling and the function of it. But there are other ways that people think about happiness. And I think there's value in all of them because it's not precise what it is. There's people that talk about happiness being both pleasure and meaning. Mm-hmm. That there's a pleasure element to it that's sort of tasty and immediate. And then there's a meaning bit, which is the narrative, the story of our lives. And that idea of the tension even or the synchronicity between the synergy between pleasure and meaning goes right back to ancient Greece. Aristotle talked about a life well lived, a virtuous life, and the hedonist talked about a pleasurable life. And actually, in my opinion, we need both of those. Mm-hmm. That if you're just pleasure orientated, we all know some people like that. They tend to get themselves into problems. And then if people are just meaning orientated, they become very dry and a bit dull. So it's about having both, in my opinion.
Mm. And sometimes one of the things I've noticed is people will say something like, oh, I just want to be happy, but they don't actually know what that means or what that represents for them.
I think it's very true. And I sometimes say that happiness is not a beach you go and lie on. Mm. I mean, the weather's been nice recently and I haven't been to a beach, but it'd be nice to lie down and just absorb in the sun. And of course that is a happiness, but it's not, if you did that for too long, you get dull. Happiness is a very dynamic process. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes when people say, I just want to be happy, they are meaning something by that. They want life to be, at ease. They want to be comfortable with themselves. They want it to be going well, the functionality of it. But it's not got much specificity, has it? And it hasn't necessarily, and there are different forms of happiness. Some forms of happiness are quite lucky. In fact, we even had the root of the word happiness and happenstance come from the same root, that there's an element of luck in happiness. And then some of the things which are more in your control and they're things that you do. And of course, that's a more reliable form of happiness, is when you sort of kind of know that you're committed to things in your life that you enjoy doing it. You're with a partner you enjoy, maybe in your relationship, when you're doing a job you work. So your happiness is more reliable. It doesn't mean to say you will be happy all the time. We never are. In fact, it'd be dysfunctional to be happy all the time, but you've got more reliability in your happiness that way.
Yeah, and I think what they really mean by that is that they want things to be different, but they're not sure how to, or they're too scared to do something about it, so to speak. And then in the next breath, I've had some people say that they're not, it's going to sound a bit weird, but they're not aiming for happiness because they see happiness as that kind of like 100% ecstatic kind of feeling that you wouldn't be able to maintain. And they say that they would rather be content, which I personally see as part of happiness, because I don't see happiness as, that buzz that you get when something really good happens. I think it's more of a constant, and as you said earlier, that kind of lack of fear that you are in control or perceiving to be in control.
As much as humans ever can be. But
yeah.
In a way, we're talking here about the array of positive emotions, that there's a whole sort of spectrum of them. So yes, actually, if I ask people what happiness is, some people will say to me it's contentment, and others will say it's joy. Yeah. But they're quite different. Joy and contentment are quite different, but they're both positive emotions. So contentment is a low energy, sort of basking, reflective emotion. You could go into serenity and peacefulness and emotions like that too with it. Or a bit more prosaic satisfaction, but there's a whole array of them, a low energy, and they're slightly reflective, actually a bit the equivalent of sadness, but with a positive thing going on. So there's a sense of satisfaction when something has gone well, and you actually reflect on why it's gone well, which is the sort of equivalent of sadness where something's got lost and you're reflecting on it. So there's a sort of link there. But then you've got other emotions which have got quite different functionality. So yes, joy, enthusiasm, you're bursting with energy, trying to seize an opportunity. It's a very positive energy. It's quite tiring there after a while, but And also enthusiasm, you mobilize other people around you. It's very contagious, enthusiasm. So, but then you have other ones, which are sort of enjoyment or laughter, which are all about being with other people and building relationships. So the functionality there is to build relationships. And the interesting thing about something like that, when you're sort of laughing with a group and you're enjoying, you're having a sort of good time with them, is actually cognitive functioning deteriorates, in the sense that you don't bring your brightest, most intelligent, most challenging self to those situations, because you're looking to be part of a group. Mm-hmm. So you're wanting to fit in. So, sometimes people at work say they don't want people to be happy. And I think they're going, well, I don't want them to just be enjoying themselves. I want them to be delivering stuff. Well, luckily, there are other positive emotions such as interest, engagement, curiosity, which are very much about that. And I think in our work, in our lives, we want to basically have a sort of agility to move through the positive emotions. And of course, occasionally have the negative ones.
Yeah. And how do you measure people's quality of life and happiness?
So when I get into the measurement part of it, it's a very nuanced thing. Like, if I say to you, because we use numbers, we basically use structured questions, and we say things like, how happy have you felt this week? Now I put a time on it there. And basically what I'm doing is saying, look back over the last week, how was it? And I do that quite deliberately, because then you get you can get a picture of people's lives as going up and down, which to me is our experience of life. That's what happens, isn't it? We have good weeks and we have bad weeks. And so you can look at episodes and you can look at the day if you want to. So, quite a lot of people who suggest we should keep diaries, well-being diaries, emotional diaries, will say at the end of the day, how was your day? On a scale of 0 to 10 or whatever they're using. And so the way that we measure happiness is in a similar way. I tend to time bound it. It's not the only way you can do it. I mean, there are different ways of doing it, but in the end, we ask people and we ask them to do a structured question on it. Yeah.
Okay. And I was going to sound a bit, I don't know, is it a first word problem? Because I remember, the words quality of life coming in about 20 years ago. And before that, people were quite happy to just have, if we go back years, what our grandparents had, a roof over their head. You're talking of a Maslow kind of pyramid here. And when you look at other countries where like if we take with the COVID situation, where we've got 4 incubators of the entire country, and then we throw in quality of life, and it's like, for some people, quality of life is just food.
It's a complex relationship with things like that. But yes, you're right, in the sense that it's, what is it? Is it a first world problem? Well, humans, I think, everywhere would rather be happier than not. Yeah. I think that's a normal human functioning. In a way, when we're happy, we know life is going well. It's a signal. And in fact, that's what we try and statistically pick up, is the good, bad signal. All the data suggests that people who are in developing countries are less happy than those in developed countries. Sub-Saharan Africa tends to come out lowest on any international ratings. But it doesn't directly correlate to sort of GDP or wealth per capita. Country like Costa Rica in Central America is happier than the USA by statistically, that their GDP is about a quarter. So it's not absolutely related, but I think there is some minimum standard there. And, of course, if your family is, is getting decimated by malaria, HIV, AIDS, conflict, you're not going to be very happy. Now, that doesn't mean to say there's not joy in those countries. Like if you go to a lot of African countries, they're very vibrant. There's a lot of positive emotions. There's just a lot of negative emotions too. And then when people are asked to assess their lives, they know that they're living in slums and they're not living in great situations. And they know that the West has higher standard of living. So not surprising they don't feel quite as happy. So the data tends to be in relationship with it. So I think it is a global issue in the sense, why do we want to help countries develop? I think it's to lead better lives. And so how do we measure that? I think it's a combination of hard health statistics like length of life, life expectancy. And I think it's soft indicators like people's experience of life. I think it's the combination of two.
And I think it can also be like kind of a double-edged sword, because when you were saying about the USA not being as happy, for instance, as Costa Rica, well, yeah, because their quality of life is such that sometimes you then want more and more and more. So you are never content.
So the way that plays out statistically is that income distribution matters a lot. If you've got income inequality, is that people who are at the bottom end of that income spectrum are unhappier than the people at the top. Generally, not always, there's always variation, and but you can think about it as a gradient. So the countries that always come out near the top of any happiness index are Scandinavian.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because they're especially happier than people in the USA who've got money. It's the fact that their poor are much happier than the USA poor.
Yeah.
And they're somewhat happier than the UK poor. So the UK has, steeper income inequality gradient than Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, right? But the US has even steeper. We're seeing, we're recording when they're rioting in the USA about race riots at the moment and the treatment. And it's not surprising in the USA because, the disparity between different communities and actually different, quite identifiable communities in the USA is a lot. So I'm not surprised that there's unrest there, particularly under the particular pressure of COVID. But, clearly in this case, normal US police brutality against blacks, which is just not helpful.
Yeah. And do you think that social media has an impact on our happiness at all?
Well, I mean, instinctively, as a parent, and mine are through the teens, but I have some stepchildren in the teens now, you think yes, but actually the studies on it show that not very big impact. There is, as always, a group that become dysfunctional, but we see them becoming dysfunctional whatever they can get their hands on. So, some are gamers, some are really addicted to their body image, some are addicted to this, but there has always been a proportion of the population that will find some anxiety to worry about. And social media can exaggerate that for sure. So I think there are ways that social media, particularly around body image and things like that, has been really very unhelpful. I think there's obviously the way that it is exaggerating differences between people. So, Trump being, the Twitter sort of, in some ways genius, monster, whatever, he exaggerates differences. So I think there's a way that social media, Facebook has done that, which is, I imagine, quite unintended from the way it was founded, but has done. It's created more silos and differences. So in that way, I think it could be undermining well-being. It doesn't come through in the data very strongly. It doesn't come through very strongly in any teen studies that have been doing. There's small effects. So it does work in the direction. We think that the more screen time you have, you're less happy. But there's sort of causality is entwined there because you're looking to the media for something which perhaps you don't have. So it's not as big effect as some people think it is, basically.
Fair enough. And in terms of as you say, assessing happiness in the workplace. Now, I remember that back in the corporate days, I put a few things in place which were not really looked at by the higher level of the food chain, shall we call it. But I personally felt that unless your team was happy at home, they were not going to work very well. And therefore, I wanted them to be happy to make sure that it made my life easier. I didn't have to discipline them, sack them, or whatever. And then everybody's happy, so to speak, or at least we're kind of stable. So how do you handle that, for instance? How do you do it in what you do?
So the first thing is that if people are happy at work, then they're clearly better workers in the sense that they are more productive, more creative, more innovative. They stay longer. Everything goes in that direction. Okay, so to run, a happy ship is a safe ship, and and a happy team works well. That's absolutely clear. So there's definitely self-interest of the team leader, the senior leader, to have happy teams, and that's basically what my Business Friday Pulse is about. Is how do you use that self-interest? Then there's the question about what we technically call spillover effects, which is that, does your happiness or unhappiness from life come to work? And vice versa, does your happiness, unhappiness from work go home? And the answer is yes, it does. They're not entirely separated. So, if you stress out people at work, they take that home and they're less good relationships with the kids, the wives, the partners. So I say wives because I'm male, but, their partners, their dog, whatever it is, they're less good human beings if they're stressed at work. But if people are unhappy at home, then yes, they bring that to, but it depends what the unhappiness is in some ways. In that, I remember reading this case study about someone, and he'd been a great salesman for years, and then suddenly his work went through the roof. And instead of them just firing him for not getting his things, they spoke to him, and his wife had cancer, and he was just incredibly stressed at home, and everything went out. Of course it affects his work. An enlightened employer would give him a month off and just say, you've been a great employee, you know, and then people would come back refreshed and grateful. I mean, you know, I lead a team, and, you know, several times over the last 5 years, I've given people a month off for mental health issues, that they've got themselves stressed in their relationship with their kids, or whatever it is. And I've just said, look, take 2 weeks off, or even 4 if you need to. And then, to be honest, it's in my self-interest, because they come back loving me, giving it, you know.
Sometimes it's too narrow-minded to not do that, because you actually also create some sort of a loyalty towards a manager or a leader, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I mean, of course, there's balances to be made. But, you know, I'm not a prescriptive leader. I'm a facilitative leader. I try and bring the best out of people. I'm not directive enough sometimes. Sorry, I've got some bleeps coming. I'll just shut that down. You know, I'm probably not directive enough sometimes, you know, and also, you know, going back to your original thing, if I get myself into problems, it's because I'm too optimistic, too positive, and I override negative signals. So I think everyone has to find their balance. And but if you know, definitely authoritarian leaders, if you look at the data on it, they don't get the long-term results out of people. They can get short-term results out of people. But, you know, if someone is, you know, your boss is being in pain, you leave.
Yeah.
If the job market allows it, you know, okay, there's other factors, you know, high unemployment at the moment, people aren't going to leave very quickly. So, you know, yes, but, you know, in normal times, then people will move on and do stuff.
Yeah. And do you think that sometimes happiness is also linked to our ability to deal with issues? Because I find that a lot of the people who are struggling with being happy, it's actually because they're not really dealing with their problems.
Again, you know, you've got entwined things there, you know, because when people get depressed, then one of the things that goes is decision making. So they become procrastinators, they put things off, they become negative, they can see the problems, they can't see the solutions. So that, you know, burnout, typically, I mean, burnout happens at work, it happens in private life, you know, and what tends to happen then is you start disengaging, you start getting negative, you start, you know, seeing only the problems. You obviously get physically drained and physically ill too. So there are ways that, you know, that which one causes which is difficult to know. But I think that any definition of well-being and happiness has to include that functionality. So you need to be able to make decisions. You need to be able to solve problems, you know, normal problems you have in life, challenges you do, you know, and we all know this, you know, we're all adults. We know people who've got themselves depressed and low, and they can't decide anything. They can't decide what socks to put on, you know.
Yeah, but without looking at the depression side of things, I think there's also some people who they want someone else to rescue them, basically. And until that happens, they're not necessarily taking responsibility for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. I think at some level, all of us want to be slightly rescued. In a sense, it's a deep childhood thing. but it's, and then, you know, of course, you know, part of the maturation process is learning that you are the decision maker in your life, and that the things that you do affect your outcomes, you know. And, you know, having to teach this to my stepson at the moment, you know, is like, you know, the decisions he's making is affecting what's going on around him. And he can't just blame his mother or blame his father for it. You know, he's got to take responsibility that now he is, you know, 19, 20, he's an actor, and he's got to make his own decisions. And that's not easy for him. He doesn't want to grow up. He wants to blame mum and dad, and he wants to not take, but, you know, his journey will be to take responsibility. Mm. And, you know, and yeah, at workplace, some people like to be directed more and some don't, some, you know, and there's balance. Most of these things there's a balance, and often people want to be directed when they don't feel competent in whatever they're doing. And I think that is about job fit, that is about skill training, that is about building their confidence. If you're always telling people they're getting it wrong, they're going to start to shrink up, and they're going to get less confident. If you're noticing where they're getting it right and telling them how to build on it, so the strengths-based approach, people start to sort of feel better and more confident. So the way that you manage people also comes into that. So it's a complex space, but ultimately treating people well, you get rewarded.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what would you say people listening to this right now could do, easy things to improve their well-being?
So about 12 years ago, 2008, myself and a colleague who I still work with, Jodie Aked, and I created something called 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which is for personal wellbeing. We did it for the UK Government Office of Science. It was part of a project we were doing. And there were 5 actions individuals could take to improve their own well-being. And they're framed as positive actions we can do. Anybody can do them, any income level, don't really cost money, though sometimes that involves it. But the first is connect, which is relationships are the most critical thing for happiness and well-being. The second thing is to be active, which is the physical activity, fastest way out of a bad mood. Luckily for all the happiness stuff, it's not quite as much, 30 minutes of sweaty exercise, which I don't like. It's more walking, moving your body. It can be dancing, whatever takes your fancy. But of course, stronger exercise works too. It's just the well-being one comes at a lower level. The third is to take notice, which people might call mindfulness now. We wrote it 15 years ago, but being noticed of what's going on in the present, bringing you into the present, whether it's outside or inside you. The fourth is to keep learning, which is that if you're learning new things, you feel good. And the fifth is to give, which is actually when we give, we feel good. So those 5 things of connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give are the things that we can most do within our own power to improve our well-being on a daily basis.
Fair enough. Well, Nic, believe it or not, we're already starting to get towards the end of our time together. So what would be your best tip for someone to be happy?
Best answer to that question I've ever heard was from Philippa Perry, who's married to Grayson Perry. And she's a psychotherapist. And she said, if you want to be happy, choose the right parents. But of course we can't choose the parents.
Yeah, said and done. Yes.
So I think that I think the best thing for happiness is to give time to the people that you are most close to, is to not forget them, not neglect them, and keep working on those relationships, because they're going to bring you the most stability and joy in your life. So your closest relationships. And
I think that one of the things that the COVID crisis, lockdown and everything has proved to a number of people is how they were taking those for granted.
Yeah.
How important they are.
Yeah. And I'm a man, and like most men, I'm not as good at best friends as women. I mean, my wife's got 10 best friends, well, she's got 4. But I mean, my 3 best male friends, I've deliberately reached out to and spoken to on the phone and rung them, not every week, but every fortnight or so. And us men don't do that so much. And I did that quite deliberately to just, on my own, taking my own advice in lots of ways.
Yeah, fair enough. But Nic, thank you so much for your time today. And for everybody else, if you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, and more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.